Hello, my name is Stephen Denman. My organisation is Shining Guidance. My website is shiningguidance.com. I want to talk to you today about social anxiety issues and how they have quite an intense effect on the lifestyles of those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD. Now, we know that social anxiety issues are far more common in autistic individuals than they are in neurotypical individuals. And the scientific research and consensus has found on many occasions that around 50% of those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD will experience consistent social anxiety problems which have a significant impact on a constant basis on their everyday lives. We also know that they experience social anxiety in terms of their cognitive processes in a very different way to neurotypical individuals, and they feel it in a much more intense way as well. Evidence suggests that those individuals with autism spectrum disorder really do find it to be a incredible struggle in actually effectively trying to integrate in social settings without feeling alienated or feeling ostracized, and social anxiety is really one of the big problems they're consistently facing when they are trying to just literally fit in and feel like they're normal. Whatever normal is, there's no such thing as normal, but for want of a better word, they feel they just want to be unconsciously accepted. So social anxiety issues in people who have autism spectrum disorder have become a very important area of research. And there are many individuals that have done very credible research into understanding social anxiety issues. And one of these individuals is Dr. Jackie Rogers. She's the senior lecturer in clinical psychology at Newcastle University in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Now, she's done research into understanding how there are various triggers or factors that arise that cause social anxiety issues in those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. Another individual is Dr. Tove Lugnagard, who's the medical doctor at the Norra Stockholm Psychiatry Clinic Administration in Sweden. She's worked very closely with another lady who is a fantastic scientific researcher into understanding social anxiety issues for those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and that's Professor Suzanne Bejerot, who heads up the School of Medical Sciences at Örebro University in the city of Örebro, which is also in Sweden. So these individuals have done huge amounts of research. They've also provided many solutions, or shall we say mental health assessments or task-based procedures that can be used to really find resolution in the subconscious minds of those individuals who do have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, in reference to dealing with social anxiety problems they feel are constantly inhibiting them on a day by day, week by week, and month by month basis in their lives. And another individual who's done fantastic work into understanding social anxiety issues among those individuals who with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is Dr. Teresa Tavasoli, who is the Associate Professor in the School of Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences at the University of Reading in Berkshire here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Now, all four of these researchers have identified four specific key areas which really are activators that bring about social anxiety issues for those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD. And the first of these is the fact that many people who have autism spectrum disorder ASD have a difficulty in recognizing their own emotions, of literally what they're feeling on a day by day basis, and they have therefore also issues in trying to correctly read or perceive the emotions of other human beings around them, whether those other human beings are neurotypical or whether those human beings themselves have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, makes no difference. So this creates a sense of social anxiety. They feel alienated. There's a filter process going on. They're not sure how to interact with people in the right way because they feel, oh, like they're not able to really understand the emotionality of another human being. Now, isn't always the case. It's the case on some occasions. Now, another one of the factors that can lead to social anxiety issues is sensory sensitivities in those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, where they may have additional sensory processing difficulties in kind of really trying to react in the correct way to sound and touch. Touch is obviously sensation. and they feel like they're being constantly overwhelmed and bombarded and surrounded by far too much external based sensory stimuli, and this can then provoke them into feeling social anxiety, and they want to retreat from the world around them, retreat from the 3D holographic reality of the material dimension that's around them. So we have to understand that sensory reactivity is the way in which a human being reacts to or seeks various kinds of sensory based stimuli, such as smells and touch and sounds and taste. And of course, with individuals who have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, this goes to an extreme level in one way or another. And of course, they can then experience sensory hyperreactivity, which is sensory hypersensitivity, being oversensitive to sound. They can also possibly suffer from in their cognitive processes the idea of sensory hyporeactivity or hyposensitivity, which is a diminished or under response or a lessened response to touch or sensation. So it's very complex for them. They find that, therefore, can be a social anxiety issue, where again it's a sense of alienation. And really deep down, what it's about is a lot of trauma from their early childhoods. There is a genetic or hereditary component to any individual who has autism spectrum disorder, ASD, but there's also a lot of imprinted trauma in their subconscious minds that's come from their childhoods, their adolescent or teenage years. And another one of the factors is that many people who have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, have a real difficulty in dealing with uncertainty or unpredictable situations. Uncertainty can therefore lead to really intensified and heightened levels of social anxiety. And of course, this kind of uncertainty or unpredictability that they're seeing around them can then possibly interlink with the other factors, such as sensory sensitivity issues. They're not reacting in the correct way to external sensory based stimuli around them in the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension. So that's not a good thing, because if that continues for those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD, what's going to happen? They're going to retreat from the world. They're going to become more rigid and fixated in their behaviours and their routines on a daily basis, and they're going to become more dysfunctional in terms of their behaviour, in terms of their perceptions and outlook on the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension. So that's another aspect. The actual final factor is really the performance related one, which is a fear of failure and therefore a fear of ridicule and judgment coming from their social peers, which could be obviously, it could be the team leader, or it could be a supervisor, it could be a line manager, departmental manager, senior manager in the business or organization they're employed within. It could be fear of ridicule because they've had a fear of failure and they're frightened of making a mistake or making an error and being found out by a father or mother, brother or sister or brothers, aunt and sisters, by a grandparent, by other relatives or close friends, or or their neighbours in the area they live. And so therefore they're going to retreat into this safety zone where they're minimising having to be challenged in any way, so there's minimal risk of them actually developing any mistakes or errors. There's no fear of or minimal fear of failure. They don't feel there's going to be any risk of them being ridiculed or judged, exposed in some way, or harshly commented on. And so their lives become very limited. They suffer from arrested development issues that can lead on to clinical depression or major depressive disorder, or MDD. That could lead on to them being so nervous and freaked out because of all the social anxiety that they haven't really resolved. They're not looking at their subconscious minds. They find it overwhelming. That's traumatic enough in itself. They develop obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So it's a constant compounding issue. So arrested development, behavioural dysfunctionality, more arrested development, more behavioural dysfunctionality. None of it's of any use, and it's debilitating over a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 year period for any individual with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. To deal with that is absolutely horrendous, and mentally is very, very stressful for them. But there are many, many positive solutions that have been developed by really credible academics, including the 4 individuals I've already mentioned. And so the key is identifying the social anxiety issues, reading the signals clearly as quickly as possible and at an early enough age if possible. So if the social anxiety issues are not dealt with in individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, they may become more repetitive and fixated in their actions, their behaviours, their their habits, their routines. They may retreat into really intricate based sort of hobbies and intellectual based pursuits and interests where they're just isolated, where they are completely cut off and socially isolated from other human beings, and they become insistent on those routines. They become addicted to those routines. They cling on to those routines and habits because they know if they don't, there's no way they're going to be able to manage uncertainty and unpredictability in their lives. And there's that fear of failure always looming in the background. So they're going to need all that multimedia sensory input from watching lots of movies on DVD, or listening to lots of music on headphones, or playing lots of online computer games, or using a games console, and many other methods of escapism that are not there to actually benefit them. They're just ways of them sort of coping and escaping, but not dealing with their own social anxiety issues. And that's a really hard thing. And you can only look at it from that angle with compassion and empathy. It's really quite sad. But researchers have begun to develop really interesting mental health assessment methods that are designed to effectively validate whether or not young individuals who may be neurotypical on the outside, but possibly have certain characteristics that haven't been fully actually ascertained. It can actually help in identifying whether they've got autism spectrum disorder, ASD, or not. And the test is known as the Anxiety Scale for Children Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASC-ASD, which is a 24 item based self or parent based reporting questionnaire, which is used to validate whether children from the age of 8 through to 16 are either neurotypical or have any traits or aspects of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. This is available to be used free on the internet. The parents act as the mental health advocates for their own children. They may just want it for one child. The parent may choose to have it for all their children. It's entirely their choice. The research is ongoing, so the tests are always being improved. So yeah, it's a fantastic diagnostic test to actually use, and it's free to use on the internet. Now, another solution that can be used in trying to deal early on with social anxiety issues in individuals who possibly have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and it's a more detailed form of mental health assessment, and that's called a clinical interview, which is officially known as the Anxiety Disorders Interview Schedule, or ADIS, which is a more in-depth, semi-structured discussion that can take place between the children and their parents. Again, further research is ongoing amongst scientific research institutes and universities, and the Anxiety Disorders Interview Schedule, ADIS, is more suitable to be used with parents of children who actually do already have autism spectrum disorder, ASD. That's been kind of literally, it has been medically ascertained that they do have those characteristics. Another treatment that can be used to deal with social anxiety issues for those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. And it's highly recommended by many different academics in research institutes and universities around planet Earth, and is very promising and yields wonderful results if used in the correct way, in a timely manner that's both effective and is applicated with empathy and patience over many months and many years, and can really help the subconscious minds of those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, to really flourish and develop in their lives, and to loosen up those rigid, repetitive habits and patterns they've got that actually can lead to subtle forms of arrested development later in life. So if these positive and proactive solutions are not used, I've already explained that it can lead to further problems, further mental health issues, can lead to clinical depression, major depressive disorder, or MDD, and even obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So the two main objectives in using such positive solutions is to try and reduce any uncertainty within the minds of the individuals who have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, by actually imprinting into their subconscious mind a new belief system that uncertainty and unpredictability is actually what they need to be focused on. That is what they should be familiar with, is that unpredictability is actually the only thing that is certain. Now think about that. And then if you can do that, that's a wonderful changing of their perceptions. That's absolutely fantastic. So the uncertainty principle or the unpredictability principle then becomes what is certain and predictable in their minds as the new rigid and fixated pattern that they can use in their perception and outlook of this 3D holographic reality in the material dimension. The second objective that you want to try and reach is to try and reduce the anxiety related issues they're suffering with by actually gradually exposing those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, day by day, week by week, month by month, to various uncertain and unpredictable situations where they feel safeguarded emotionally and physically, but they are suited to the needs and wants and the requirements of that individual who is someone who has autism spectrum disorder or ASD. So, I just want to also mention the individuals that I feel massively contributed towards a greater understanding of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, very early on, many decades ago, but were not really officially accepted as individuals that really were founders of a lot of the scientific research that's being officially accepted by research institutes and universities around the world in reference to autism spectrum disorder, ASD. And the first of these individuals is the Russian physician and psychoanalyst who was known as Sabina Nikolaevna Spirin, and she was one of the first female psychoanalysts of the very famous Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst known as Carl Gustav Jung, who is obviously the founder of analytical psychology. Now, she's a unique person. The lady known as Sabina Nikolaevna Spirin literally went from being a psychiatric patient of Carl Gustav Jung, then she became one of his students, then she became his laboratory assistant, then she became an academic colleague of Carl Gustav Jung and studied prolifically Jungian psychoanalysis and analytical psychology, a truly unique individual. And she really touched on many of the aspects of the traits and characteristics of what would later be grouped together to define autism spectrum disorder or ASD. Another individual is the Swiss psychologist who was known as Jolan Jacobi, who was one of the closest students of Carl Gustav Jung. She worked with him for many, many years, and she wrote many journals and books on Jungian psychoanalysis and Jungian psychology. Then, of course, you've got the great man himself, very famous in his own right. Most people have heard of Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. Obviously, as I've just mentioned, he founded pretty much all the tenets that would define analytical psychology in Switzerland. What is interesting is that Carl Gustav Jung actually is believed to have had certain aspects and traits that can now be defined as autism spectrum disorder or ASD. Now, Carl Gustav Jung also trained as a research scientist with Paul Eugene Bleuler, who himself was the Swiss psychiatrist and humanist, and his most notable contributions to understanding mental health conditions really can be summed up in the fact that he coined several psychiatric terms, including schizophrenia, schizoid, autism, and depth psychology. So I thought it was important to include all this in this video presentation because those four individuals, they really had a very profound and rather unseen influence over the development of modern scientific endeavour and understanding in reference to autism spectrum disorder or ASD. And I think I've given so much information in this talk that there's not much else I can really add. It's fascinating information. I'm sure you've all really enjoyed listening to what I'm saying. It's information that I could have discussed in much greater detail, but for the purposes of this video presentation, I had to really summarize it in an effective and correct manner and really convey it in a succinct way. And I think any individual that has autism spectrum disorder should be saluted because it's very, very difficult for them to live their lives in an effective way. But resolving social anxiety issues is really one of the key areas that can be looked at as a way of releasing them over the long term and using healing in an empathic and loving way for them so they can live positive and highly productive lives, and they can feel like they are fulfilling themselves and their intellectual potency is fully recognized, and they can excel and have great and fantastic careers. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed what I've presented here. Many more videos are going to be produced in the near future. But on that note, again, I'd like to say thank you very much and goodbye.